Welcome back, Wolfpack. Verlis here to a facts, stats, trivia, and a top 10 for the ground typing. Now, the ground typing is going to be fairly balanced when we look at it defensively. That water, grass, and ice, those are your standard weaknesses that you already know about, and ground is so common, you should know of them by now. Immunity to electric, of course, a resistance to poison and rock. Actually, poison getting more common because of fairy typings, and rock, a lot of flying threats right now, so ground, very balanced, has a lot of common weaknesses, but resists a lot of strong things as well. Offensively, ground does really well. Electric, fire, poison, rock, and steel as super effective hits and only resisted by bug and grass with the immunity to flying. So we also have a lot of really solid super effective hits. Poison, very powerful. Rock, steel. Steel doesn't have too many weaknesses, so getting in on that weakness is really nice. Fire, electric, it's all good. Bug and grass, not really too crazy of types either, and then flying, so at least we can play around with it like that. Looking at the breakdown of average stats of all evolved ground type Pokemon, it looks really good. I mean, at least for the first couple of stats, we have second place for hit points, so huge hit points. Tied for third with attack and defense, or attack and defense are going to be third place each, so very high amounts of offenses and really good physical defenses. Then it drops off really bad after that. No special attack, because ground seems more physical. Special defense is fairly low, and speed because the earth and ground type things don't like going too fast, so it just makes sense. You know, it's at the bottom there with steel and rock as well, so the stat breakdown is actually really true to what you would anticipate the type to be. Now when we look at these stats, Garchomp, I'm just going to say Garchomp is like the most used ground type Pokemon of all time, and then we also have Mega Steelix with the highest amount of defense in the game for all ground type Pokemon, and the stats for that just kind of keep going down. As for the legendaries, there are 5 ground type legendaries, but this does include multiple forms such as Primal Groudon, and when we go to break it down even more, it is the 7th most common typing with 8.3% of Pokemon being the ground typing. If we want to see why the rating is so nice on those base hit points, we just go over to Cerebi, that they rank Pokemon by their base stats and base stat totals, and for ground types, we can see that this little sample right here, the average for the hit points was around 90, but as we can see, a lot of the Pokemon are well above 100, over 110 as well, and if we look at the list, quite a lot of ground type Pokemon just in this little sample. There's also just high amounts of hit points spread throughout the ground type Pokemon by average, so it is a very durable typing. Next up, we have a clip from our rock top 10 list. If you want to go check that out, it's probably in the description if I remember to put it there. But if we check out rock types, there was a bit of a confusion in the first generation that since rock was paired with ground, it could have been anticipated that the rock type was also immune to electric, which is kind of one of the big things about ground typing. But even then, the electric inconsistencies kind of come through. Like if you go to the anime, remember when Pikachu beat up an Onix through electric attacks? Well, it was like implied that if you just make your electric type stronger, you can eventually hit ground type Pokemon, because Pikachu wasn't able to affect Onix, and then it affected Onix, and apparently if ground types get wet, they're even more susceptible to electric type. It doesn't make any sense, guys. If we want to get a little bit more trivia, for the 6th generation, there were no pure ground type Pokemon introduced, so Kalos, the only region to have not had a pure ground type Pokemon, as we can see on the left. Other regions and generations have had at least one pure ground type Pokemon, and also the ground typing is the most immune typing thanks to flying type Pokemon and the levitate ability, double dipping on just ground type being immune. Now what we're going to do is hop over into Pokemon Showdown to get onto our list of the top 10 ground type Pokemon. Number 10, I'm going to put Nidoking, because Nidoking is a very powerful Pokemon with that Sheer Force ability. So, Sheer Force, hidden ability, and what happens is attacks with secondary effects get 30% more power. So it's like a free Life Orb. And speaking of Life Orb, if you give it Life Orb, it also gets that 30% more damage, but the 10% hit point drop is actually ignored because it's counted as an effect when using a move that's applied by Sheer Force. So, for example, if you use Earthquake, you're going to see Life Orb damage, but if you use Earth Power, you won't, and you're still going to get all that boosting, which is also why Nidoking, here's like extra trivia, is seen as a better special attacker than a physical attacker. Even though its attack is higher, for the special attack being lower, it's going to apply more things with higher base power on average than the without Sheer Force. So, say Earth Power, 90, well, what happens is that's going to get a Sheer Force boost, and you're also losing less hit points, and you're only 10 power less than the Earthquake, so it's going to come over really well. Same with other moves. Ice Beam. Well, Ice Beam is 90 base power, however, Ice Punch is only 75. So we're going to get a better sheer force boost and just more damage overall, which is why we'll see the special attack. Also, the average physical defense of Pokemon is going to be higher than special defense, which is why having a special attacker can mix it up a bit. So Nidoking has a lot of strengths. It's a pretty cool Pokemon. I want to put it number 10 on the list because it deserves some respect. It pumps out massive amounts of damage. Next up for number 9, I'm going to put Krookodile on this list right here because it does have a lot of diversity. You know, we have the Moxie ability, so it can snowball into a sweep. We have Intimidate. If it wants to be a little bit supportive, it can. And even Anger Point for those very, very niche, you know, kind of Anger Point strategies where you use Frost Breath on it and then it maxes out its attack and goes off under a Choice Scarf or something like that. It's a thing. It can happen. So Krookodile is going to have a balance of stats that goes out pretty well. 117 attack isn't huge, 92 speed isn't fast, but I mean, you can give it a Choice Scarf with Moxie, and that kind of fixes all of its problems right there. Whenever a Pokemon is knocked out, it gains 1 stage of attack. That works, and if you're Scarfed, you're already going to be very fast on that 92 base speed, so Krookodile can work like that. Also, very good coverage. Ground is arguably one of the best offensive typings because it hits a lot of things super effective, takes care of a lot of threats, and having access to the Earthquake, 100 base power for free with no drawbacks in the accuracy or anything is kind of ridiculous. Then you can also run some good amounts of coverage from there. We get access to the Crunch and then whatever else you want to put onto it. I mean, we even have the Fire Fang if you want to go and use that. You can take out Ferrothorns and other Pokemon. So your coverage is going to work out really well. You just need to go into that first Crunch, first Earthquake, just take out a lowered foe, and then Moxie is going to snowball you, and it can get pretty huge from there. But at the same time, Krookodile isn't regarded as one of the most ultimate sweeping Pokemon. Does take the right scenarios, can be a little bit of a problem at times, but overall, fairly reliable, fairly strong. And let's get into number 8 with Garchomp. I honestly don't understand the Garchomp hype. Like, it's mostly just a very safe Pokemon, which is why people play it, but it has a lot of weaknesses as well, that all you have to do is hit it with an Ice-type attack, and that Pokemon's gone. Garchomp, GG just right there, but at the same time, it has a lot of good stats, which is why it's so reliable. 108 on the hit points, high amounts of defenses, so it can survive super effective hits that are only 2 times super effective. It can survive non-super effective hits really easily, and it can still be quite a hassle. It puts out a nice amount of damage, outspeeds this 102 speed. Fairly good as well because a ton of Pokemon have 100 base speed. Garchomp just edges them out. It can also run Life Orb, so I mean, you just go Jolly Life Orb, and now you're outspeeding all those Pokemon. You have good amounts of damage compounding right there. But the thing is, it has to run a speedy nature or it has to give up damage from the items. So sometimes you're not going to find the right KOs that you need with Garchomp. It's going to come just shy of damage sometimes, which is why I don't think it's too much of an insane Pokemon. However, the hitting ability Rough Skin is pretty ridiculous as well. Try to hit physically, you're taking damage, it's going to be dealing damage back to you because it's not going down. It's just very reliable, fairly powerful, and it's got to be on a list somewhere for ground-type Pokemon. It's up there as one of the most used Pokemon ever. Really good base stats as that pseudo-legendary. I just don't get what the hype is about most of the time. It feels like it's good enough, but it's not always that Pokemon that can go for the massive amounts of carry and become this ultimate threat. So next up on the list, we're going to put number 7, Quagsire. Now, here's how these lists work. Just because Quagsire is number 7 and Garchomp is number 8 doesn't mean that Quagsire is objectively better than Garchomp in every way. I just feel that the pros of Quagsire have a lot more cool outplays and a lot of more cool things that it can pull off compared to Garchomp, which is a bit more binary. And even then, Quagsire in a matchup against Garchomp actually wins out pretty well. I brought up a damage calculation right here, for example. So say we have Jolly Life Orb Garchomp, one of the more kind of common Garchomp that you're going to see. If it's using Outrage, well, Quagsire, it can survive that first hit of Outrage, use Stockpile, and then it can just recover out until like Garchomp gets confused or goes down to Life Orb damage or something like that. Same with Earthquake. If Garchomp is playing it safer on that Earthquake, it can eventually heal up, even with like leftovers and stuff. You get to sneak in a second Stockpile at some point, then you can heal up even more, or throughout the Scald. Scald has a 30% chance to burn, Garchomp gets burned, does even less damage, so even then, Quagsire gets to beat Garchomp, even though that's not always the case with these lists, and that just kind of shows that Quagsire, what it wants to do is it wants to have that unaware ability. If your opponent is going for some kind of setup, Quagsire can be a really good response to that, and then it can just really super frustrate your opponent out. So you have a couple of options from here. I personally like the Stockpile. If you gain defenses and they can't gain any stats on you, because that's how it works, you know, you're going to keep the +1, +2, +3 on those defenses, and even if your opponent goes for something else, they can't do anything about it. So you're just going to get tankier, which offsets the average, below average tanky stats of a Quagsire. If it gets that in, it can snowball it really well. After that, we have Recover, so we have our own forms of Sustain that gets very powerful. I could see a Citrus Berry. It's going to buy you a little bit of extra time as you kind of keep going into a ramp up. Leftovers is going to last you for longer though, so it's your choice on that one. I've even seen like Chesto Resto sets if you want to get super crazy about it. But yeah, then you run the Scald. Eventually, you're going to use Scalds, burn your opponent. Now your opponent is taking that damage over time. You're able to recover, and it can do just a little bit with the Earthquake. So something like that could get a little mixed. If you want to stay consistent, you can also throw out the Earth Power. Earth Power can get interesting as well. Small chance to lower your target's special defense, which means Earth Power and Scald are going to be doing more damage from that. And just the overall idea is you stop your opponent's momentum cold, it can stockpile up, it can do just a lot of really stupid tanky things, and it doesn't do well in stall matchups. Like if they bring in a stronger stall Pokemon, Quagsire is going to lose out, but it can handle a lot of sweepers depending on how you're defensively set up, and it works out pretty well depending if you want to be full special defense, full defense. I've talked about Quagsire enough. Only has one weakness as well, 4 times weakness to grass, and that's kind of what we're looking at right here. So grass less common than ice, and dragon does better weakness wise, whatever. We're going to go and talk about number 6 on this list is going to be Gastrodon. Another water ground typing. Water ground is one of the best typings, and the reason why I put Gastrodon so low on the list is because we've actually seen it in a lot of different metas. That for the VGC, if there's a heavy kind of rain setup going on right there, boom, you just bring it in for the Storm Drain, and then you can like use Surf combos, or you can use it to draw in Scalds. Like you make a good switch in, boom, Scald hits Gastrodon instead, boost it up on that water immunity, and now it's looking really good right there. It actually has a huge anti-meta role, as well as just carrying the right coverage. It gets access to the Ice Beam, so it can handle Pokemon like Salamence, like Garchomp, if it goes unchecked like that, which is kind of ridiculous. Has Scald, has Earth Power. The coverage on this Pokemon is insane. Also plays anti-setup on the Clear Smog. It can go full tanky by running like Toxic into Recover as well. So you can do whatever you want with it. It's very diverse, a very tanky Pokemon as well with the 110, or actually 111 on those base hit points. Good defensive stats right here, and if it's playing for those super effective hits, special attack at 92 can feel a lot heavier than that. So Gastrodon is going to be just a good Pokemon. You can run singles sometimes, has a lot of that counterplay potential, so it's going to be one of the stronger ground type Pokemon that you can see, which is why it's going to be number 6 on the list. Number 5, of course it's going to be on the list somewhere, Landorus. Now when it comes to which of the Landorus is better, Landorus Therian just sees a lot more play because it's a bit frustrating. Landorus Therian just sees more play because of that Intimidate ability. It works in singles to cut down on the huge physical meta. It works in doubles to cut down on the huge physical meta, and it also intimidates both of the opponents, which is rather massive right there, so it gets a huge gain right there. Also its speed. The 91 base speed puts in really good Scarf range and 145 attack. So its raw attack is going to be higher than Garchomp's while being slower, but when you're Scarfing and outspeeding everything anyways, kind of doesn't matter. And even then, it has really good just natural stats right there. 90s and 80s on defenses, 80 on the hit points. It can play it out really well, just do a little bit of damage. But the reason why I don't see it as like the strongest, while probably being the second most used ground type Pokemon next to Garchomp and even more used in VGC, but across just the board, you know, I think Garchomp has seen more play throughout competitive history right there. Comes to Landorus, it does enough damage. It's not there to one-shot everything and make huge plays, and it's not this huge coverage mega sweeper Pokemon, but it's just the disruption that it comes in. That Earthquake is going to hurt. It gets Stab on a 145 attack, and then you run like Jolly Scarf, so that's pretty insane. It's already making it to where it's taking less damage because of Intimidate, and then it can go and throw out the Rock Slide, and this is one of the more devastating aspects. Your Scarf Rock Slide, you hit both of your opponents, and then they each have a 30% chance to flinch, or you just bring it in like that. Also, for some reason it has access to the U-turn, so it's even more safe. It's safer than safe. It comes in with the Intimidate, U-turns out, helps set up for another Pokemon. If they switch in something, you know, Landorus just plays those options really well, and it can be pretty nasty like that. Also, it's not just stuck on the Scarf, it can run Assault Vest. It works really well with one of those as well, and you can kind of just play it however you need to. It does have a good amount of weaknesses though, Ice being 4 times super effective, so if you land that on it, problem is approaching it. Ice type Pokemon, super effective by the Rock Slide. It's just hard to get in on the Landorus, and it does pretty disruptive stuff, which is why I'm going to put it high on the list at number 5. Alright, let's back out. Let's get into a fresh list right here for number 4 being Mamoswine. I put Mamoswine higher on the list than Landorus just because I feel that, like, in single battles, Mamoswine does really cool stuff. Also with the ice typing, it kind of trumps a lot of the powerful meta and ground types and flying types that it can have, so we can play it up really well. Thick Fat also reduces that super effective weakness on the fire, which is pretty massive. And even then, 130 attack, comparable with the Garchomp right there, good tankiness. It's just a very solid, reliable Pokemon. As for the item, you can see all kinds of items, all kind of setup on the Mamoswine. Like, it can go Scarf into massive damage. Like, Icicle Crash becoming a move was one of the biggest buffs to Mamoswine ever. 30% chance to flinch, while also having 85 stab-based power is quite ridiculous. So it got a nice little buff right there. 90% accuracy is kind of annoying, but you just Scarf it, and now you outspeed every Dragon-type Pokemon, and you just get to absolutely clean up against a lot of different Pokemon. Also, Stab Earthquake gets pretty huge right there, and you can even run like an Adamant Nature. So what we end up doing is we go like Adamant, we throw on the Scarf, and then we use it as a heavy counter Pokemon, and it does a lot of nasty things like that. Or you can also run a Focus Sash. So Focus Sash is going to give you different setup options. Like with this, you're actually going to be able to run something like a Stealth Rocks. So you set up Stealth Rocks, and then you're able to kind of anti-tank from there. Like, you can be a huge tank-busting Pokemon, but outspeed a lot of Pokemon, since most of the tankier Pokemon are going to be below 80 base speed and not investing into it at all. So whatever you outspeed is going to get absolutely crushed, and it can be a very frustrating Pokemon to deal with. Having good reliability, good amounts of setup, it just works, and it works pretty well. Can also carry Ice Shard, so as priority if it needs it in a pinch. It covers out pretty well. So I think Mamoswine's a really solid Pokemon. I'm going to put it number 4 on the list of ground types. And then we're going to get into number 3 on this list, which is going to be Gliscor. This Pokemon, like, invented some of the heaviest stall potential in this game of just being sheer disgustingly tanky once it gets that Poison Heal. So Poison Heal, well, all you have to do is go and then you give it a Toxic Orb right there, and then it heals more than leftovers at the end of every turn, while also having ridiculous defensive stats. So you max out the hit points, you can go a little bit in the special defense, or you can go full defensive tank. You can bring Gliscor onto almost any physical Pokemon as long as it's not throwing out some huge Icicle Crashes or some kind of physical Ice type hit like an Ice Punch, but overall Gliscor is going to tank insanely, and then it gets access to the Roost. So because it has Roost, now you can heal up over half of your hit points through the Poison Heal, and you just don't, it just doesn't take damage. From there, you can carry some options like what I've seen ridiculous stuff. You'll see Ice Fang, because it gets elemental coverage. So you can Ice Fang against other Gliscors, and they can run like a Swords Dance set. So what we want to do with this is Swords Dance and Ice Fang and Earthquake. This gets momentum really fast, and people don't know how to respond to it. If you can't burn it because it has the Toxic Orb, so you can't reduce any of its power like that. If you can't knock it out while it's trying to set up, this thing's just going to run away with the battle because it's way too filthy. You also see Sub and Toxic. Now this is where things get even more disgusting. So okay, throw out the Substitute, and then you also might even have like a Protect or something into Toxic. This is the ultimate of Toxic stall right here, because what happens is it uses Substitute, it loses a quarter of its hit points. Well, then it gains an eighth because of Toxic Orb. Then it uses Protect, so now it gains another eighth back. Now it just already paid off for the Substitute right there. So it effectively never loses health, unless you're one-shotting it. So this can stall you out, and then at some point it sets up the Toxic, goes into the Roost, back into the Substitute, and then it just protects away while you lose to the Toxic. So you can beat this out with Steel and Poison type Pokemon, but then Gliscor switches out into another tanky Pokemon that can deal with that. Gliscor comes in at some point. If you can't handle Toxic Stall, you're going to lose, and Gliscor is absurdly frustrating when it can do very nasty things like this. So you can see all kinds of stuff. Protect is really good, because if you lead with that Protect, it's going to give you that free Toxic Orb. You can't get statused on that turn that could disrupt it. You know, if you get a burn in before the Toxic Orb happens, that can absolutely shut down a Gliscor. But until then, it's absolutely destructive. And unless like the whole team is behind or something, and then Gliscor goes up against a special attacker with super effective hits, it's just going to dominate the entire battle through being sheer tanky and filthy and just absolutely nasty. So let's go on to number 2 on this list with Hippowdon. Hippowdon, another huge defensive tank. I mean, 108 on hit points, 118 on defense. This Pokemon can come in and respond to so much. Has Slack Off, so it has Sustain. It can also come in and go for the Stealth Rocks and Stone Edge and Earthquake. So I mean, okay, this is going to be pretty standard right here. You have Slack Off, you have Stealth Rocks, you have Earthquake, and you can even carry a Whirlwind. And so you can also use Roar if you want to, but I think Whirlwind is cooler, because like you have a Sandstorm and you whip up Sandstorm, you throw out the Whirlwind, and things get pretty ridiculous. But this set right here, physical Pokemon don't do anything to you. you can set up a Stealth Rocks against them with confidence. You'll eventually be able to get a Slack off. If they're trying to use like Swords Dance or Dragon Dance or trying to set up against you too hard, just whirlwind them away. And you can also run the Rocky Helmet. That way, pretty much the ultimate physical defensive response sets up Sandstream for your team as well. You can find a lot of synergy. If you're running like a Sandstorm kind of team, you can actually find a lot of success like this, especially with leading off with something as reliable as a Hippowdon. Boom, you lead against almost anything. Stealth Rocks is going to work out. You find a switch, or you eventually get forced out into something that's going to want Sand Force or Sand Rush or even Sand Veil, and now you can just kind of dance around your opponent's team while being super nasty. And Hippowdon is always a good Pokemon. Like, you just switch in, slack off whatever damage you took in on the switch in, and then you play it out through like Earthquake, or you can whirlwind them through your Stealth Rocks, and that could get pretty bad as well. That Whirlwind, oh, now they take that Stealth Rocks damage. You slack off Whirlwind, and you can phase through your opponents almost infinitely until a special attacker comes in, but then you just go into a tanky Pokemon that can eat up an Ice type or Water type hit, and you're going to be fine. So Hippowdon's just really nasty the way that it combos with a lot of things, and it's just, until you've used it. I think that's one thing. I didn't realize how powerful Hippowdon was. I started using it, and it's one of the strongest Pokemon I've used, just from a pure defensive tank standpoint. Then I'm going to go into honorable mentions right now. Mega Swampert, ground-type Pokemon, works in rain really, really well, but because that Swift Swim, it does take a little bit of setup, and for some reason, it just feels like it falls short a bit, you know? With that 150 attack, it doesn't have Life Orb boosting damage, it doesn't have a Choice Band, it doesn't have anywhere else to go. Now, it is a really tanky Pokemon, and Swampert in general is pretty nasty as well. So as long as you're not seeing super effective grass-type attacks, you can kind of respawn one-for-ones really well with the Swampert. Could easily be somewhere on this list in the top 10, which is why it's an honorable mention. I just think that it doesn't see enough play. It doesn't have like a huge snowballing potential. It's kind of like a Garchomp that's a little less in a way, so that's why it's not going to be on the list. But same with Swampert, Mega Swampert. It can do all kinds of really fun stuff. Definitely deserves some kind of mention when talking about the strongest ground-type Pokemon. Same with Mega Camerupt. Mega Camerupt needs a lot of setup as well, but if you get it under a Trick Room, throwing out those eruptions, you know, VGC, that's what you do. You go Protect, and then you go into the Trick Room for an Eruption, and now all of your opponent's Pokemon go away. Eruption damage on that 145 special attack is going to be absolutely massive. You do have Water-type attacks to worry about, and Ground, so it does have a lot of weaknesses, which make it hard to balance that Eruption. At the same time, we're going to get a really strong stab Earth Power, because Earth Power, Sheer Force, 145 into Shenanigans, good coverage overall. Can also carry something else like a Flamethrower for single target damage. It works really well, has surprisingly massive amounts of damage, but at the same time falls behind just a bit because a lot of weaknesses that it can get overrun with, terrible speed, so you need a Trick Room, and that's kind of it. So very niche, very powerful potential, but nothing that feels like it'd be strong enough to reliably make it on the top 10. Now let's talk about the strongest ground-type Pokemon. I'm going to put Excadrill. Reason being because Excadrill is a Steel-type Pokemon, Fairy-type Pokemon got introduced, and then Excadrill went wild. Excadrill was already painful enough to deal with in the 5th generation because of the Sand Rush ability. Boom, you go Hippowdon, you go Tyranitar, some kind of Sand Stream Pokemon, bring in Excadrill, and now Sand Rush makes it super untouchably fast with a very high amount of attack, 135, so it's going to be doing good amounts of damage. You can do Choice Band, Life Orb, you outspeed everything, you go for some massive Sand Dunk right there, super effective hits, good amounts of coverage overall, and you can even run a Rapid Spin, so, not Rage, you can even run Rapid Spin, because what that means is if your opponent's trying to do some kind of trickery by getting their own Stealth Rocks, their own Sticky Web, whatever, just come in under that Sand, Rapid Spin, force that tanky Pokemon out, do massive amounts of damage to everything coming in. You get to do really cool things on that Sand Rush. Also has Mold Breaker. So now we have a ground-type Pokemon that can be really fast with a Scarf as well. You give it Scarf with like Mold Breaker, attack damage on 135. Well, now Levitate Pokemon like Rotom, which are pretty serious threats, do go away pretty easily on that Mold Breaker. And then we can also see even Sand Force. If we want to do more damage in the sand kind of setup, we can do that as well. So Excadrill is just going to be an absolutely filthy Pokemon. Great coverage. Steel Ground it's just ridiculous right there. So it can work out really well. Huge damage, really strong against a lot of the meta, and it's just a very powerful Pokemon overall. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Facts, stats, trivia, top 10 ground type Pokemon, and I hope you all have a nice day. Leave a like if you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.